Hi, we're here with William Ullman from WUDA. He's going to be showing his work at Northwest Modern, and we have some questions we'd like to ask you if that's all right.
Certainly.
What do you think are some of the things that define regional sensibilities in art and design?
Having, in general, I would say one of the greatest common denominators for regionalism tends to be the sense of place, which is exactly the name of the show. And what I found in my travels, and also just in looking at artists' work from Portland and Seattle, is that the greatest sense of place has to do with the environment, not necessarily in terms of working with the ecology or anything, but more to do specifically with the natural surroundings, the rivers, the farmlands, probably the forests and the hills and the mountains, the natural topography. Artists who have come here from Japan. There are many American citizens who have come here from all over the world, Europe, Japan, Korea, China, just to name a few, and they all are struck and they're all in awe of the beauty of the region. You could see it in their sketches. I mean, if they're doing something very abstract, then you can always see how it links back to natural forms or an abstraction of natural forms. And some of them are even ahead of their time in terms of understanding, I think, ideas about chaos theory and things like that. I think that's something that was sort of tagged onto more current work, but actually you could see how those ideas resonate within even the modernists of the 50s or even turn of the century modern artists and sculptors and architects. Just to name a few, I'd like to just sort of pay homage to a few people that are influences on me, who are from the Northwest and go back to the 50s and 60s movement in Seattle and Portland. And a local sculptor here in Portland that I really admire is Lee Kelly and his prolific career as a sculptor, and in particular his fountain sculptures, and in downtown Portland and up at the Washington Park. And then there's George Stakawa and his son Jerry Stakawa in Seattle, who have been working since the 50s and have pretty much proliferated or have done an amazing amount of work actually, and are pretty well known. And then there's Paul Horiuchi as well, who I admire very much, who has done a lot of amazing work with collage and painting. I think there's a real strong culture here, and when I look at all of those people's works, I see all of them either responding to or playing off of the natural surroundings, the beauty of the natural surroundings. And the other thing that I think also influences regionalism is the industries that come out of the environment, or come out of the natural environment. For instance, logging, fishing, all these things are extremely relevant and play a large role as a kind of expanding of the discourse in art and in people looking at their surroundings, because I think we're in a place now where where the lines are blurred, where people don't really distinguish necessarily between natural environment and then the industries that come out of that. I think that's the way I feel. I don't want to make a distinction necessarily. I just want to look at what's here and what has come out of it. And obviously human beings have played a part, and that all just depends on whether you consider humans part of the natural environment or not. Some people are purists and think really that it shouldn't be touched by humans, or things should be, pure in a sense. But that's kind of an impossibility in a way, because the artist himself or herself is the person who is changing the viewpoint or providing a viewpoint, whether it's through the medium that they're using or what have you. So that for me is a good sort of background on the discourse in regionalism. Mm-hmm. From there, you can expand on it, and one could even talk about food, and obviously that's a large part of our culture. We have reasons for looking, then there's the whole environmental movement also. And that's also, I think, an extension of having revering nature and honoring what's natural and what's healthy, versus things that are perhaps toxic to the environment and, for lack of a better term, artificial or made by human beings. And so it's a complex thing, but because there are contradictions certainly within all of that, because artists are always working in new materials and sometimes toxic materials, and but I think that there is a movement here definitely to try to stay away from that or move away from it, or to find alternatives to it. And I think that's an exciting new aspect of all of this. Whereas I think the artists of the 50s and 60s would have just been working with any kind of toxic art medium, because that was what was available and that's what was considered acceptable, and nobody was concerned about where stuff got dumped, how the environment was impacted by it, or whether it had a carbon footprint or any of those kind of issues. For me personally, those issues are very important, but my instinct is to just look at the natural surroundings and then to honor it in some way, and also the way people have lived here. And it can be, and certainly one of the things I'm looking at more are Native American Indians and the way they lived here, and that's something I'm just exploring really from an academic standpoint, but not really. I haven't really done anything. How should I say? I haven't done any real solid research or anything like that. I do read about it, and I have a lot of admiration for their history. So, and I think a lot of people who come here to this country do as well. So, but having said that, as a background, for me personally, my work, I grew up in Portland most of my life. Then I've moved all over the place to LA and Seattle and back. I've stayed pretty much on the West Coast, and have been influenced by West Coast modern architecture that I saw in Los Angeles, a movement from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. People like Rudolf Schindler, and who were a major influence on me, and then many European modern architects as well. But and then there were a lot of contemporary people. But and I am trained as an architect, so I've worked for 17 years as an architect, and so a lot of what I do tends to look, I think, maybe somewhat architectural, or but what I really feel is influential on me, and this doesn't have that much to do with Northwest regionalism, but this idea of but I think Northwest regionalism definitely borrows from it, because a lot of the people that were working in the 50s were certainly looking at a lot of turn of the century to the mid-century modern ideas and ideals to inspire them. And so the Bauhaus movement and the kindergarten regimen that was created for children to help them understand how to manipulate objects and geometries, that all had a major influence on even people in here in Seattle in the 50s movement, George Sakawa and people like that, and through people like even the Eames and people, designers like the Eames were all influencing people up and down the West Coast as well as all over the world. But I think it had a real strong impact. So I know I'm kind of rambling around and stuff, but to me that can kind of show you the real huge, depth that we're addressing in terms of modernism. The word modernism goes well beyond that, even if you really want to get into really historic, breaks or events in history. But in terms of just design and West Coast and then Northwest modernism, if you see it in all those contexts, you see really the richness of it. And but for me, I'm still trying to look at things that influence me, and a lot of them were things like the logging industry. I grew up, my family had some land out near Vernonia, and which was a huge logging camp, or had a huge logging camp out there on Kesey, and we that was the name of our land, what we called it Kesey, and there was an old broken down trestle at the end of one of the roads. It was actually just a railroad spur that, not spurred, but a railroad that went out over the trestle, and that all collapsed after the logging industry started to falter. And we used to drive under trestles, and I was always in awe of just these huge wooden structures that were still up, or either, even the fact that they had trains going over them. And then I did some more research and found even more amazing imagery at the Oregon Historical Society, and some of this imagery is stuff that I've sent you in my application for the show. But and it definitely had an influence on my work. I mean, almost a one-to-one, like, wow, that's a really cool looking thing. I'd like to do something like that. Coupled with my liking to build things, and whatever you could say that even the Erector set and the Lego set were a huge influence on me. So, but coupled with those things and seeing those things in the real world in big, huge scale versus things that I had looked at as a child also, and to this day still do. I think those would be some important Northwest influences on my work, as well as as I said, something that comes out of the natural environment, but also as an extension into the industry. Same with fishing and boat building. And I spent time in Seattle and have. I'm not a boat. I've never done any boat building, but I've been around people who have done that, and who have been in shops and been around. And I have done woodworking in shops, obviously, but all of these things. And then there's my heritage, which is Japanese, Korean, American, and European. So in some weird way, I am the amalgam of all of these things, and yet I guess I have to admit that I have been aware of that, and I have been always referring to it throughout my life and using it to feel my work. That's it for me. I don't know. I mean, there may be something else I've forgotten, or.
Well, you've addressed all of the other questions I already have, so I can't ask you anything else, but thank you so much for sharing your ideas and thoughts. I really learned a lot, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And we look forward to having your work at Northwest Modern.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.